You think a Christmas gift meant to bring the family closer would do exactly that, right? Wrong. Turns out, there's no merry in discovering you're not biologically related to your own child. Funny how a small plastic tube and a postage stamp can dismantle an entire decade of trust and love. It all started with the holiday spirit and one too many commercials about uncovering your ancestry. My wife, Amelia, and I had always joked about the mystery of my heritage. Was I part Scottish? Maybe Italian? The possibilities were endless, or so I thought. The DNA test seemed like a quirky, harmless idea, something to add a little spice to our holiday traditions. Little did I know, the spice would burn. Christmas morning came and went, and I dutifully spat into the little vial, sealed it up, and sent it on its merry way. Amelia watched me with her usual warm smile, her excitement almost infectious. She even joked about how the results might reveal some royal lineage, which in hindsight is ironic. Because what the test revealed wasn't exactly regal. It was a ticking time bomb. Weeks passed, and life went on as usual. School drop-offs for our son, Ethan. Date nights with Amelia. Work deadlines. If someone had told me that this was the calm before the storm, I wouldn't have believed them. But then the email arrived. Your DNA results are in. The subject line read, cheery and unassuming. I clicked it without hesitation, ready to find out which long-lost regions of the world I could claim as my own. The results were fascinating at first. Turns out I'm mostly Irish with a splash of Scandinavian, which explained my love for cold weather and whiskey. But as I scrolled down, I noticed something odd. Ethan's name didn't appear on the list of close family matches. There were distant relatives, sure, third cousins, great uncles I'd never met, but no son. No Ethan. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe I'd done the test wrong, or maybe the company had made a mistake. I tried to convince myself that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. After all, this was just supposed to be a fun holiday experiment, not a life-altering revelation. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't an error. It was a cold, hard truth staring back at me. I didn't confront Amelia right away. Instead, I sat with the knowledge, letting it fester like a wound I couldn't stop poking. Every interaction with Ethan felt like walking on a tightrope. Every glance at Amelia felt like a spotlight on the secrets she might be hiding. And the worst part? I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without questioning everything I thought I knew about my life. The results had opened a door I wasn't ready to walk through, but I knew there was no closing it now. For days, I carried the DNA results around like a live grenade, unsure of when or if I should pull the pin. Every glance at Ethan felt like staring into a puzzle where one piece didn't fit, and yet I couldn't bear to think of him as anything but my son. Amelia, on the other hand, seemed blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in my head. Or maybe she knew. Maybe she was waiting for me to say something. Either way, the silence between us felt heavier than ever. Looking back, I started noticing things I'd ignored over the years. Ethan didn't look much like me. Sure, kids don't always resemble their parents, but there were no shared features, no quirks that tied us together. His curly hair, his sharp jawline, his subtle dimple. All Amelia's, or so I had thought. Now I couldn't help but wonder if they were someone else's too. Then there were the late nights. Over the years, Amelia had taken more and more girls' trips with her friends, always coming back refreshed and glowing. I'd never questioned them. She deserved her time away, right? But now those trips felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. Even small things, like the way she'd tense up when I casually mentioned old acquaintances, began to gnaw at me. Was she always like this? Or had I just been too blind to see it? The breaking point came when I found the photo. I wasn't even looking for anything incriminating. I'd been clearing out an old box in the garage when it fell out. A picture of Amelia from about a decade ago, laughing at some event. Her arm was slung around a man I didn't recognize, his face frozen in a smile that made my stomach churn. There was an easiness between them, a familiarity that made my skin crawl. On the back, in Amelia's neat handwriting, was a date, 9 months before Ethan was born. I could have stopped there, but curiosity and anger have a way of working together like gasoline and fire. I needed to know who he was. I needed to know if this was all in my head or if the grenade in my pocket was about to blow. A quick reverse image search led me to his name, Tyler, and a social media profile that confirmed my worst fears. Tyler looked like Ethan, the same sharp jawline, the same curly hair, even the dimple. He had a kid of his own now, a wife, a life that seemed perfect on the surface. But 10 years ago, he'd been single, traveling frequently for work, and apparently spending time with Amelia. I felt like I was watching my life unravel in real time, the threads pulled apart by a man I'd never even met. But here's the thing, I wasn't just angry at Amelia or Tyler. I was angry at myself, for not seeing it sooner, for ignoring the signs, for letting my life be built on a foundation that was now crumbling beneath me. And that anger? It wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. When I started piecing it all together, it felt like my memory had turned into a crime scene, every moment now suspect. There were things I'd brushed off for years, details I'd filed away as unimportant or harmless quirks. But now, with the knowledge of Amelia's betrayal, they took on a sinister clarity that sent chills down my spine. I remembered the night of Ethan's birth, how Amelia had clutched my hand, her face beaming with exhaustion and joy. I'd been so overwhelmed by the moment that I hadn't questioned the strange absence of her parents. "They'll visit later," she'd said, brushing it off with a laugh. Her mom had always been overly critical of me, so I didn't push it. But now I wondered, had they known? Were they quietly judging me for celebrating a child that might not even be mine? Then there was the fundraiser. It was about a year before Ethan was born, a company event Amelia had dragged me to. I'd spent most of the night nursing a drink and awkwardly chatting with her colleagues, while she'd mingled effortlessly, the social butterfly she always was. I remember her disappearing for nearly an hour, returning flushed and apologetic, claiming she'd been helping organize something in the back. At the time, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But now, the memory replayed in my head with a darker undertone. Was Tyler there that night? Had I been the clueless fool standing in the wings while they laughed at me behind my back? Even our honeymoon seemed tainted in retrospect. Amelia had insisted on a last-minute change to our destination, swapping out a tropical resort for a quieter, more secluded retreat in the mountains. I hadn't minded. I was just happy to be married to her. But the timing had always felt rushed, like she was trying to outrun something. Or someone. And then there was the dimpled smile. Ethan's dimple. It wasn't just that it didn't match mine. It matched Tyler's perfectly. I remembered the first time Amelia had pointed it out, cooing about how cute it was. "He must have gotten that from some long-lost relative of yours," she teased. I'd laughed along, completely oblivious to the truth staring me in the face. But the worst memory, the one that haunted me most, was the night Amelia had come home from one of her girls' trips early. She'd been glowing, practically floating through the door, a happiness I hadn't seen in months. "Missed you," she'd said, kissing me on the cheek before rushing to shower. At the time, I thought she was simply excited to be home. But now, I realized that glow wasn't for me. It was the afterglow of someone else. Every memory felt like a thread in the web Amelia had spun, each one connecting her to Tyler and their secret history. And the more I pulled, the more the web unraveled, revealing just how deep her betrayal went. It wasn't just the lies. It was the effort she'd put into maintaining them, the audacity of building a life with me while keeping her past, and possibly her present, hidden in plain sight. I wasn't just questioning our marriage anymore. I was questioning every single moment we'd shared, every smile, every touch, every whispered, "I love you." The anger was consuming, a fire that burned hotter with every revelation. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was an accomplice to my own humiliation, a willing participant in a life I hadn't truly understood. But not anymore. This time, I was done playing the fool. I needed answers, real answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. I didn't want to believe it. Every instinct told me to let it go, to push it all down and keep living the life I thought I had. But once you start pulling on a thread, you can't stop until the whole thing unravels. And this wasn't just a thread. It was a rope tied tightly around my neck, suffocating me with doubt and betrayal. I decided to confront Amelia. Not directly, not yet. I wasn't ready for the lies, the excuses, the tears that I knew would follow. Instead, I needed to get my facts straight. If I was going to bring this up, I wanted to be armed with the truth. Cold, hard, and undeniable. I started with Tyler. His social media was an open book. Pictures of his family, his job, his hobbies, it was all there. But what struck me most were the timestamps. 10 years ago, around the time Amelia and I had been newlyweds, Tyler had been working in our city. His photos from that era were full of happy hours, company events, and weekend getaways to places that looked eerily familiar. One in particular stopped me cold, a group photo taken at a local vineyard. In the background, almost out of frame, was Amelia, laughing, glowing, standing just close enough to Tyler to make my stomach turn. I couldn't stop staring at the photo. It was proof, wasn't it? Proof that their lives had intersected in ways I'd never known. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. That's when I remembered the box. Amelia kept a shoebox of keepsakes in the back of our closet, a sentimental collection of ticket stubs, postcards, and little mementos from our life together. I'd always thought it was sweet, a way to preserve our memories. But now, as I pulled it down and sifted through its contents, I realized it wasn't just our memories in there. Mixed in with the movie tickets and birthday cards was a folded napkin from a cafe I didn't recognize. Written on it, in handwriting that wasn't mine, was a date and time. March 14th, 7 p.m. My mind raced. That was about 9 months before Ethan was born. There was also a matchbook from a boutique hotel across town, one we'd never stayed at together. I flipped it open, and my chest tightened. Inside, written in the same handwriting as the napkin, were the words, "Until next time." I couldn't deny it any longer. The evidence was right in front of me. This wasn't just a suspicion. It was a reality I had to face. That evening, I asked Amelia to sit down. She looked confused, maybe even a little nervous, but she complied. I started slowly, laying out the facts one by one. The DNA test, the photo from the vineyard, the napkin, and the matchbook. With each piece, her face changed. The confidence drained away, replaced by something I hadn't seen before: fear. When I finally mentioned Tyler's name, she froze. It was like a switch had been flipped. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. Instead, she sat there, staring at me with tears in her eyes, as if waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. The rage I'd been carrying for days, weeks, it was gone. In its place was something colder, sharper. Resolve. I stood up, looked her in the eye, and said the only thing I could: "I'll be staying somewhere else tonight. Don't call me." As I walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I was in control. The lies, the secrets, they weren't mine to carry anymore. Amelia had built a house of cards, and I'd finally blown it down. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Walking out of the house that night felt like crossing a line I couldn't come back from. The air was sharp with the cold, but for the first time in weeks, my mind was clear. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. The weight of what Amelia had done was crushing, and being near her was suffocating. I drove aimlessly for an hour before checking into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The room was small and smelled faintly of bleach, but it didn't matter. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there to think, to plan, to figure out what came next. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall as the reality of my situation sank in. Amelia hadn't even tried to explain herself. The lack of denial, the absence of excuses, it was like an admission without words. And yet, I couldn't stop wondering about the details. How long had it been going on? Why had she stayed with me if she had feelings for someone else? And the most painful question of all, had she ever really loved me? I thought about Ethan too. My son. Or at least, the boy I'd raised as my son. The DNA results didn't change how I felt about him, but they did complicate things. How was I supposed to handle this? Should I tell him the truth? Should I even stay in his life? The idea of losing him was unbearable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living on borrowed time. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I didn't give him every detail, just enough for him to understand the situation. He listened patiently, then walked me through my options. It was a cold conversation, clinical and detached, but I appreciated the clarity. By the time we hung up, I had a plan. I would file for divorce, but I wouldn't blindside Amelia. She deserved to know what was coming, even if she didn't deserve my kindness. Later that day, I met with her at a neutral location, a park near our house where Ethan often played. She looked tired, her face drawn and pale. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the photo, the matchbook, the years of lies, and the pity evaporated. I laid everything out for her. The DNA results, the keepsakes, the timeline I'd pieced together. I told her I was filing for divorce, that I couldn't continue living in a marriage built on deceit. She cried, of course. She begged me to reconsider. She said all the things I'd expected her to say. But I didn't waver. I'll always care about you, I said, my voice steady. But I can't trust you. And without trust, there's nothing left. Her tears didn't move me. Neither did her promises to change, to do better, to make it right. It was too late for that. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. As I walked away from her that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, relief, it all swirled together, leaving me both hollow and strangely liberated. The life I thought I had was gone, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe, in losing everything, I'd finally found the truth. But there was still one thing left to do: talk to Ethan. And that conversation would be the hardest of all. Sitting across from Ethan at the kitchen table, I felt the weight of what was coming settle onto my shoulders. He was only 9, still a child in so many ways, but old enough to sense that something was wrong. His big brown eyes, wide and innocent, locked onto mine as he swung his legs under the chair, waiting for me to speak. I had practiced this moment 100 times in my head, but now that it was here, the words felt clumsy and inadequate. How do you tell the boy you love more than anything that the life you built with him was based on a lie? How do you explain that even though nothing has changed, everything is different? Ethan, I began, my voice quieter than I intended. There's something we need to talk about. I kept it simple. I told him that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and those mistakes can hurt the people they love. I explained that his mom and I wouldn't be living together anymore, but that it wasn't his fault, and nothing about my love for him had changed. I didn't mention the DNA test. I didn't mention Tyler. I didn't see the point in burdening him with details that would only confuse him. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then, to my surprise, he leaned forward and wrapped his small arms around me. I don't care, he said, his voice muffled against my chest. You're my dad. And just like that, the weight lifted. It didn't matter what the DNA said. It didn't matter who Tyler was or what Amelia had done. Ethan was my son, and nothing could change that. Not a test. Not a betrayal. Nothing. The divorce moved quickly after that. Amelia didn't fight it. How could she? The evidence was overwhelming, and her guilt was plain to see. I kept the house, partial custody of Ethan, and, most importantly, my dignity. Tyler never made an appearance, which didn't surprise me. Men like him rarely stick around when things get messy. As for Amelia, I don't know if she ever truly understood the depth of what she destroyed. She tried to make amends, of course, offered to go to counseling, wrote me long letters full of apologies and justifications. But none of it mattered. Some wounds don't heal, and ours was too deep, too jagged to ever mend. Months passed, and life settled into a new normal. Ethan and I developed our own routines, our own traditions. Friday movie nights, Saturday morning pancakes. He started calling me Chef Dad whenever I attempted anything more ambitious than scrambled eggs, and I started calling him Captain Chaos because of the way he left Legos everywhere. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a good one. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering about Tyler. Did he know about Ethan? Did he care? But those thoughts never lingered long. They didn't need to. Ethan was mine, not because of biology, but because of everything we'd shared, everything we'd been through together. No DNA test could take that away. Looking back, I realized the betrayal wasn't just a breaking point. It was a turning point. It forced me to see the cracks in my life, to face truths I'd been too afraid to confront. And while it was painful, excruciating even, it also gave me the chance to rebuild, to start fresh, to focus on what really mattered. Amelia's lies may have shattered the illusion of our marriage, but they didn't destroy me. If anything, they reminded me of what I was capable of surviving. And in the end, that's all you can ask for. The strength to pick up the pieces, the courage to move forward, and the wisdom to never look back. Ethan and I are doing just fine now. Better than fine, actually. And as for Amelia? Well, let's just say the grass on the other side wasn't as green as she'd hoped. Justice, in its quiet way, has a funny way of working itself out.